The purpose of this lesson is to learn the basic elements that will be contained on your web page, how to organize the content on your page, the difference between inline and block level elements, how to insert special characters on your page, how to style your page by using cascading style sheets or CSS, and the difference between inline, embedded, and external style sheets, how to validate your web page, and then lastly, how to upload the web page to a web server by using FTP. In the last lesson, we talked about the basics of our web page and what needs to be contained on the HTML document. We always start off our document with a doc type declaration, and it's just simply doc type HTML to specify that it is an HTML5 document. And then our next line is going to be the opening for our HTML. And remember, our HTML document has an opening and a closing tag. We have a head, which will contain things like our title. And our title for this one is going to be Lesson 3. And our head has a beginning and it also has an ending. And then our document also has the body, which is where items are going to be contained that show up on the body of our document in our web browser. There are a couple of pieces of information that we left off of this basic document that we need to add to them. The first one is our HTML tag up here. We need to specify what language we are speaking, and that way our browser understands how to interpret that data. So instead of just HTML, it's going to be HTML lang for language equals EN for American English. The next thing that we need to do is tell the browser what character set to use, whether it's going to be English letters, if it's going to be Latin, if it's going to be Chinese characters, and so forth. So we are going to add a meta tag to the head section, and it's meta char set. So this is our character set equals, and then the one that we want to use is UTF-8. And so this tells the browser to use this Unicode character set. The next thing that we want to add to our page are some organizational elements. And so what I'm going to do is inside of the body of my document, I'm going to add a header that has an opening and a closing. I am going to open a navigational section, so a nav. I am going to open what's called a content div. So I'm going to open a div. And notice each one of these has an opening and a closing. And then lastly, I'm going to open what is called a footer. Now the purpose of these sections is to organize our web page so that it understands where elements are on our page. So the header is going to be something like the text that shows up at the top of the document that state the name of our page. The nav section is going to be a list of links to get back and forth between our different pages. The div here is going to be our body content, so the stuff that is actually contained in the content area of our page. And then the footer will be something like a copyright notice at the bottom of the page. So in my header section, I am going to indent a couple of spaces, and I'm going to put an H1. Remember, H1 is our largest heading, and I'm going to call this Lesson 3. It also has a closing. Our footer down here, I want to include something like our copyright information. Now this is a paragraph, and I want it to say copyright, and then I want it to have that C character. And the problem is we don't have the C in the space on our keyboard, so we can't type it in. And I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. So what I want it to say is copyright, and then the C, and then the year 2015 Universal Class, and then close the P tag. So the question is, how do we get that C? And the way that we're going to use that or do that is to include what is called an HTML entity. There are certain characters that are reserved for the use on a web page. Things like our less than sign and greater than sign, those actually have meaning because they're used for the beginning and ending of tags. There are other symbols, things like spaces, and the way that HTML works is it will ignore two spaces side by side and treat them as just simply one space. It ignores what's called white space. So if I put 50 spaces side by side, I will still only get one space. So the way that this works is an entity is going to start with an ampersand, the and sign. It is going to be the name of the entity that I want to use, and in this case I want to use the copyright entity, which is just simply copy, and then a semicolon. And what this does is when the page is rendered, it will actually replace this with the actual copyright symbol. So if I come over here and refresh the page, I will see that I now have less than 3, that's my header as an H1. And then my copyright now has the C character because I use the HTML entity. You will notice that the nav and the div sections, so nav here and div, nothing appears over here. And the reason for it is these are just simply organizational headers. They simply define where things go on our page. Now, what I want to do is my div here, I want to give this an identifier, so we're going to give it a name. So what I'm going to do is div and then space ID equals and then content, because this is where the content of our page is actually going to go. So whatever I want to type that I want to appear on the page as the body of my document is going to go inside of that content div. What that does is tells the browser that this logical section should be formatted in such a way that it is understood by the browser to be the content of the page and not navigational things. It's not anything that has to do with copyright. It is the actual main section of the page. As you will see, what I did for this lesson is I created an additional document. I created a beginning underscore css.html document. And then I also have my index.html, which is the document that we created in the last video. Now, in my beginning underscore CSS, the reason for the underscore is I cannot use spaces in my file names. If I do, I have to use a special character to designate that, and it makes our URLs look really bad. So we want to make sure that you don't ever use spaces. Use an underscore or put the two words together, but do not use spaces. Okay, so what I want to do in my document that I'm creating is I want to make a link that goes back here to index.html. Now, a link to another page should be under my nav section. And so what I want to do is to create what is called an anchor tag, which is an A. And every anchor tag has what's called a hypertext reference. It's simply meaning this is going to be a link that will allow me to hyperlink or jump to another document. So I'm going to type href. So href designates where this link should go. Okay, so the href is going to be equal to, and in quotes, index.html. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to type index again, because this is what is actually going to show up on the page as the text for the link. And then my A tag, my anchor, actually has a close. And so if I go back over here to my page, I will see I now have a link that says index. Now the thing is, when I click on index, it will take me back to my index page that we created in the last lesson. In the last lesson, we used an ordered list and an unordered list for simply putting bulleted items. We are going to reuse that to create our list of links up here. In our nav section, what we want to do is we actually want to create an unordered list, and each link here is going to be a list item. Now, for the time being, it's going to be a bulleted list, but we will use this later to format it with CSS so that way we can have our list of links across the page like we're used to seeing in a link bar. So remember, our unordered list starts with a UL, and then it ends with a closing to the UL, and then each list item has LI and ends with an LI. Okay, so notice I took the link itself and I put it inside of the LIs. This is what is called nesting. I open the LI first, then I open the A tag. And when I close these, I have to close them in the reverse order. So I close the A tag first, and then I close the LI tag. So what I should see is if I highlight these, All of this A is contained within those two LIs. If I did something like this, if I put the A tag on the outside, then what happens is if I highlight these in the middle, the things that are directly around index, you'll notice that LI should close with the A, and that's not correct. So you want to make sure whenever you create these tags that they're always properly nested. So you open them in one order and then you close them in the opposite order. Okay, so we're back to closing the A and then closing the LI. And then what happens is when I come over here, you will notice my index is now a bulleted list. And like I said, the purpose for this is we can actually manipulate a bulleted list and make it into a formatted list of links. I want to show to you what it would look like for your page to have some text on it. So what I have done is I have inserted some dummy text into the page. It is here just simply to hold space so that way you can see what it would look like with text on the page. There are other things that you can use, such as lorem ipsum text, which is gibberish text that is used by typesetters. The problem is when you try to use that, it will usually end up confusing the client. They'll try to figure out what language it is, and they get fixated on that. They can't look at the design. So I've learned to just use text that shows this is where your body content would go. So I'm going to show you what it would look like, and here's our text. One thing that I want you to be aware of is this text is the default font for my browser, which is typically Times New Roman. Now, Times New Roman is what is called a serif font. So I want to show you what that looks like. A serif is a font that has these little hooks at the end and the things that stick out. A sans serif font, or one without the serifs, is something like Arial. And what I want to do whenever I design a web page is I want to use a sans serif font. These are easier to look at the smaller text on the page. And I only want to use a serif font sparingly, maybe for something to highlight a specific little section, as something to show contrast or something to bring attention to it. But for the most part, I want to use a sans serif font. What you will notice, though, is that the text that is contained on the page is all serif font. So we need to change that somehow. To modify the text, I'm going to use what is called CSS. HTML provides the content for the page, but it does not provide good formatting capabilities. CSS gets applied on top of my HTML document to format it a specific way. So the way that I'm going to do that is by adding something to my p tag here. I'm going to add an attribute called style, and it's equal to something. Okay, so what is it equal to? Well, CSS has all sorts of different capabilities, and the one that I want to play with in this case is one that is called font-family. And what font-family is it will allow me to specify if it's Arial, Times New Roman, whatever else. And so the way the CSS works is you have an identifier, so in this case, font-family, and then a colon, the one with the two dots, a space, and then what is it going to be set to? Well, in this case, I want it to be set to Arial. I want my font family to be Arial. And then when I'm done, I'm going to put a semicolon. So what this is telling is this particular p tag, style it such that the font family is Arial. So when I refresh my page over here, I will see that one paragraph changed. Okay, so I want to do the same thing for my other paragraphs. Okay, so that means I need to take this section of code here. I'm going to copy it. I want to paste it in here and paste it in here and then refresh. Okay, so I got those three paragraphs, but I didn't get lesson 3. Index is not formatted that way, and the footer is not formatted that way. So instead of doing it here at the individual paragraphs, I want to do it somewhere higher up in the list of organization. And one of the highest things in my organization is actually the body. So I want to style the body this way instead. So I'm going to remove these from my p tags. And then when I refresh, now everything is formatted that way. This is what is called an inline style. And what that means is that for this one particular tag, this is how it gets formatted. That's done inline. I have three different ways that I can apply styles. I can do inline right here at the body. I can do what is called an embedded by putting a style section inside of my head and formatting them here. Or the other option is for me to add an external style sheet, which is actually a separate text file that contains all of the styles. So what I can do in the style section is I can do the exact same thing here for this body tag, except I can put it up here in the head. To do this, what I have to do is I'm going to indent a little bit and specify what the name of the tag is that I want to modify. So I'm going to say body, and then I'm going to open a curly bracket and close a curly bracket. And then inside of here is all of the stuff that I want to do to style it. So actually this font family right here, I want to cut it and I'm going to paste it up here. And then I'm going to get rid of this style equals down here. So this is called an embedded style sheet. It will do the exact same thing. It'll still get formatted the same way after I refresh it. But now it is all defined up here. And what I can do now is I can specify things for all of the body tags, which in this case there's only one, all of the P tags that are contained on this entire page, all of the images, all of the links, everything that I want to manipulate on this one page, I define them here and they'll all get applied in that order. Okay, but let's say I have 10 different web pages that I all want styled the same way. Well, instead of defining that in the head for all 10 of those documents, what I can do is I can create a text file and I can import that information from the text file into my document. There is what's called a hierarchy of application of these CSS files. And the external style sheet, the one that is in a separate file, will get applied first. Then the embedded style sheet up here in the head will get applied. And then any of the ones that are in line, the ones that are specified at the particular tags, will get applied. Which means that the one that's applied at the tag is the one that's actually going to be the most effective, which means that that's the one that shows up last. That's the one the end user will actually see. So let's say I declare the font family here in the style, in the embedded style. I declare the font family at the actual body tag, and I declare the font family in an external style sheet, and I set them all to different fonts. The one that would actually take effect would be the one that's here at the body tag. So whichever one is closest to the actual tag is the one that is effective. We will play with the CSS style sheets more in future lessons, but in this particular lesson I will also want to show you one more thing, which is called the difference between a block level element versus an inline element. And a block level element is something like this paragraph tag, where it actually creates a blank space after the line. And if you imagine drawing a rectangle around this whole paragraph, that is actually what the system does. It creates a block to hold space for that paragraph. So what I want to show you is how this works. I'm going to add a CSS style called a border. And like I said, we'll play with these more later. But my style is going to be equal to border in 1 pixel of solid black. And the idea here is I want you to see how this works. This black border here actually represents the space that it takes to hold this one P tag. Now if you notice, my space is from almost border to almost border, and there's a little tiny white here on both sides. This is what's called the margin. And there's typically 5 to 10 pixels worth of margin. We can manipulate that. We can make it bigger, smaller. But keep in mind, whenever we play with a block level element, it will always go from the left side of the page to the right side of the page, just inside of the margins. Okay, so every paragraph does this. So if I take this exact same style and apply it to my other paragraphs, you will see that each paragraph has its own block. On top of it, my div up here also has its own block. Now, a div is what is called a block level element also. And so the div itself goes margin to margin, and all of the outside here, and my div contains these other blocks. And actually, I'm going to make this blue color so that you can see the difference in them. But this blue is our div, and the black ones are our paragraphs. So what we can see here is that my div, the content div, contains the block level elements called p tags, the paragraphs. Okay, well, sometimes I don't necessarily want to highlight an entire paragraph. I want to be able to highlight just a couple of words. Okay, so I want to take this. It is just here for the purpose. So we're going to take from here to here, and I want to put a border around just this little thing. Okay, now a div is a block level element, which means that it's going to force a line break. So if I were to put a div here, if I put this thing in a div, it would actually put a line break before and after it is just here for the. And I don't want to do that. So my options are I can use a div to define an area of content, or I can use what's called a span. And a span is called an inline inline element. So the idea here is that I can manipulate this section of text by putting it inside of a span tag. Okay, so now this little section of code, it is just here for, is now inside of the span, which is inline. And then now watch what happens when I apply the same style. So this time I'm going to make it orange. And so now what you can see is I have a block level element called a div that contains other block level elements called p, the paragraphs. And this first paragraph, this first block level p tag, contains an inline span element that I can manipulate also. So by putting all of this, it is just here for, inside of the span, I can manipulate this little section of text without forcing a line break. Whenever we create HTML code, what we should do is always validate it. And the purpose of validation is to make sure that our code will actually work in every web browser that's out there. The World Wide Web Consortium is responsible for maintaining standards for web pages, and they have what they call the W3C Markup Validation Service. And they have a couple of options here. You can validate it by URI, so you can type in the website address for any web page and it will try to figure out if it is validated or not. You can upload a file by browsing on your computer, or you can do direct input, which I'm going to do. So I'm going to copy and paste the text that is in my document directly in this field over here. And the way that this works is I'm going to click check, and it's going to check for any errors and what are called messages. Errors are things that definitely will not work in certain browsers. Messages are things that we just need to be aware of. They may not cause a problem. So I'm going to check my data, and it says that it passed. It says the document was successfully checked as HTML5. It passed, but it had 2 warnings. So if I want to see what my 2 warnings were, then I can scroll down, and it will show to me what the 2 warnings are. Now, the one is that it's using an experimental feature, so I can ignore that one. The other one is stating that because I pasted the text in, when I pasted it in, it pasted it in as Windows format, and the system is automatically going to convert it to UTF-8. Remember, that was our Unicode encoding. So I can ignore both of these and just simply take the congratulations that it passed. And like I said, the idea here is that if my page passes, then any browser out there should render my page properly, and it should look the same on whatever browser and whatever platform I'm using. Once you're comfortable with the file, your web page validates, everything is okay, then we're ready to stick it out on a web server somewhere. You have to put it on a web server for other people to be able to see it on the internet. You can go online, do a search for web hosting. You will find all sorts of places to find it. In my case, I have a server where I'm uploading them, and the server is at course.universalclass.com. And what I want to do is I want to upload this file. So I'm going to use FileZilla, And FileZilla is what's called an FTP client, File Transfer Protocol. Up here in the corner, you have this thing called the Site Manager. I'm going to click on this icon, and it will take me in to see a list of what they call your sites. Now, your sites are just simply the servers that you've stored. I created a new site called Universal Class, and I put in the URL to get to it. Now, wherever you're hosting your file will tell you what the address is. One of the things you need to be aware with FileZilla is the new versions of it will default to using encryption for all of your connections, and some FTP services will not allow that. So here where it says encryption, you may need to change this from use explicit FTP over TLS if available to only use plain FTP and secure. Now it's insecure because it is sending your username and your password as plain text over the internet, and if somebody is running what's called a packet sniffer, they'd be able to see your packets and be able to find out what your username and password are. So in this case, the server that I'm using is only plain FTP. So this is my username, my password, and then when I'm done, I want to connect to it. So to connect, there's a little drop-down box right beside the Site Manager, and you select the server that you want to connect to. Okay, so I am connected. The left side shows to me my local files and folders. The right side is my remote server. Okay, so right now I'm getting an error message because there aren't any files on the server. It's giving me an error because I need something. And the last time we talked about where we need to have an index.html document. So to put this on there, I'm simply going to drag it over to the right, and then it has uploaded the file. So now when I go to the server and refresh, I will see the document that I created. Now notice the smiley face is giving me an error message because the smiley face isn't there. I also need to upload the images folder for that index file to show the correct images. Now my smiley face shows up. Okay, and I want my beginning underscore css.html, so I'm going to drag that one over. And so I didn't put any links on my index file. We will actually do that in the next lesson. We'll start adding some more links to these. But if I want to go to my file, I am simply going to add the name of the file at the end. So beginning underscore css.html, press enter, and here's my page. In this lesson, you learned about the different content elements that are contained on your HTML document, how to organize the page content in your document, the difference between inline and block level elements, how to insert special characters on your page, the basics of CSS and inline embedded and external style sheets, how to validate your web page, and also how to upload your site via FTP.